We are live. And there's
Enterprise is joined.
and at the last minute, there's Carolyn.
Always.
Hey, better late than never. All right. So, hello and welcome to Community Manager Live. I'm David Dewald, Community Manager at Sienna. Each week, we bring a collection of community industry professionals together to discuss a topic suggested by our audience. If you would like to check along with us today, you can do so on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitch, where we can pull your questions and comments right into the stream. If you prefer to just watch or listen, you can do so on Twitter. And you can find links to all of that at the top of the page on cmgr.live, Live. This week, we're going to be talking about creating a community strategy, why you need one, what it is, and those kinds of things. Jeremy, if you want to kick it off, what is a community strategy and why should I have one?
Hi, that's a great question. I'm Jeremy and I build online brand communities for mostly B2B software companies. The strategy is super important because I think it provides a framework for, what you will spend your time on and what you won't. And also like, what are the trade-offs in terms of resource? Community can impact so many different areas of the business, anywhere from the support organization, sales efforts, marketing, customer success, product feedback, and ideation. So I've gotten better over time at being more strategic. And I think what it boils down to is getting your stakeholders together, going on a roadshow, seeing where you could gain traction, and then with those groups, making sure everyone's aligned. Once you've gathered all the requirements and requests from a people, content, technology, and experience perspective, like what are you moving forward, and what are you doing? Like what's the actual work in the day-to-day? But then also like what are the indicators that the community is performing well? And then how do you tie that to metrics that actually matter to leadership at the company? Again, my perspective is super software company focused. I'm sure and actually have been involved in community building efforts in other industries that are maybe less like about tying your work to revenue. So happy to speak to that too.
Carolyn, you want to offer your opinion? And say hello. Tell everybody who you
Hi,
are.
everybody. Sorry for being last second again. But I'm glad to be here. Nice to meet you, Jeremy, as well. First time hanging out. So with my experience with community building so far, strategy has been kind of my inroad. My background, for those who don't know, is social marketing, and that is super strategic, right? So that's all focused on like behavior, end results, like with all of that in mind and working backwards from that, right? Like what's the end result, whether it's revenue based, action based, or like some sort of milestone towards that business outcome. The communities that I run currently are, one is SaaS, so that's very software side, which I'm new to, and it's a startup, so that's unique. One is an artist community, and one is my own, which is a community for business owners that want to do more intentional marketing. All of those function really differently strategically. The artist community it has the longest history. So that one was really interesting when we started out. Our strategy was super different. And because we had set a strategy, it was a lot easier to pivot because we knew what our plan was and what wasn't going to work anymore and what we would need to change on our roadmap long term and how to shift it. So setting out from zero with no strategy would have been way, 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 way more difficult. So getting started with that and coming in like on a ground floor, which is something I've done with all the communities that I'm part of, it's super important, even if you're wrong on what your strategy is, to have one.
That's a good point.
I'm laughing, Carolyn, because I just had a conversation this morning about how we had nothing to do with community, but just in life, how, if you don't fail and learn from it, we don't grow. And I think that's so important when we look at communities and strategy is, I've been super focused on like the launching strategy of a community lately.
Mhm.
And it's like so important that your strategy is not static. It's like an evolving thing as you learn and fail sometimes in your, because really strategy is just a vision of where you want to get. And for me, it's like, you set out the strategy. And I love what both of you talked about, Jeremy, talking about having those goals aligned with the business and making sure that that strategy is doing that. Carolyn, I think you talked about looking at where your goals were and working backwards. And I think that's like how I perform strategy. It's like, where do we want to go? Let's work backwards and start from there. But it's also one of those things about, really pushing to, make sure that everybody's taken into account. And I think too many strategies don't take into account the people that are going to be in your community too. And so sometimes it's a matter of doing that onboarding and user research, member research interviews to understand what they're needing. Because a lot of the assumptions I think that we have as community builders, strategists, managers, whatever we want to call them, our clients never take the time to ask the people what they want that are going to be members of the community. So I think that's such a huge important of developing your strategy. But I think the key messaging that I want to get across is your strategy, once you create it, is not set in stone. It's a moving, breathing, entity that you need to evolve with as your community evolves as well.
Yeah, a true living document, something that is constantly evolving, and being able to abandon things that don't work, without feeling like you have to stick to it because it's on the books. So where would one, do you think, would get started? What's the best way to start? Let's take the perspective, since it's familiar to you, Tim, of launching a community. How would your strategy, maybe how would you start for that?
Well, what I love, and especially where I'm at now, is this is all we kind of do, right? Is we work with clients and get them their community set up for them. We're platform agnostic, so it's not like we're trying to sell you our platform or anything like that, which I love. It's all about listening to the client, the prospect, and what they're looking for. And what I love about where I work today is if we find somebody that doesn't share our shared values and what community is, nice call. See you later. We don't move forward with them. So it's a pretty nice space. I mean, it's a little scary, right? We are a startup. And so it's like, you want revenue coming in, but we're not going to take revenue at our expense either. So when we're not going to spin our wheels, because we like doing stuff fast. And so it's all about like, when we find that right partner, it's about really getting to the core. And what I've loved, sometimes our customers come in not knowing about, like how to form a community, but they know they need one and they know why they need one. And that is so refreshing, because so many past conversations have all about me trying to convince somebody why they need a community. And so I think the strategy part is really getting to that core of where these business goals are and how the community can help align to get you there. And once you have those two pieces, it really becomes pretty easy, I think, with the experience to kind of ideate with your client, with your stakeholders, what they think will work, what they're looking to get out of it, what's going to drive the community to get to those end goals. And so it's really about like that whole process of, I think really doing a deep dive to understand the business goals, where they're seeing the community playing a role in it, and then kind of making that path. But before we go building anything or suggesting anything, we want to have those, like I mentioned earlier, we want to have those interviews with potential members of the community, because those are the people that are going to be using it. They're the people that know what they want to get out of it. It doesn't matter what we say, what the client says, if the member doesn't want to get that out of it, because all we're doing is taking assumptions. When we get it from those people, we're getting what they actually need and want. And so when we're able to do that, combine all three of those things together, that kind of gives us our blueprint for how we can create the architecture of the community, what features and functions we have. We don't need to make it perfect. We just need to get that first, kind of MVP, the minimal viable product out there, and then we can iterate off of it after that. And so that's kind of our process of going through. And we have a whole kind of canvas that we work with once we have those initial discovery calls with clients that we move into that give us a lot of that information. Then we go into the interviews, and then we kind of create the suggestion, the plan, mock up the community forum, and then we start building it. And usually within 4 weeks, 4 to 8 weeks, we can go from a discovery call to launching a community for a client.
Anyone else?
I think that this all dovetails really nicely with what Tim and I were DMing on Instagram about last night. We were having a laugh because WhatsApp just launched their communities on their platform, right? Like air quotes needed. And we were kind of bantering about how that's not a community, right? That's a tool. And I think the whole working backwards from a goal is great. Currently learning this with all of my communities, like having the goal in mind for business. And 2 out of the 3 that I manage, that has not been necessarily supported with how the users want to use the community. So I then had the choice for both of them to die on that hill or to move forward and like actually be an active listener and pivot and adjust what the offerings were, how the community is structured, all sorts of different things. And that was integral to the strategy, and it's definitely something with this third community that I'm incorporating a lot more. I thought we did enough early listening with the other 2. We had a beta group of 10 for our artist community and did exit interviews after the beta test was done. Those are recorded. We analyzed them, looked at commonalities, made adjustments, and ongoing, we really needed to be a lot more strategic about setting up those touch points again, one-on-one with active members, inactive members, members whose activity lapsed, like, what's going on? What do you need to hear from us? And adjusting the strategy. But working backwards has been really helpful because, having that vision and seeing and checking in with people and sharing that vision is really, really helpful, because when you can talk to your members and say, this is what we want the community to be, do you agree? Because you're here, you are the reason this is here. So explaining kind of the trajectory can help, because then people can either upvote or downvote and let you know really actively if they like the direction that you're heading or not. And that will help you inform your strategy even better.
Yeah, I can chime in as well. I think what's coming to the fore for me in this conversation is the importance of being able to translate to different stakeholders what this does, because community as a term, I think they ran a survey, and most people think of like real estate when they hear like a community. It's like, do you manage a building? Do you liaise with your city government? Like what is this? So I feel like the term is very flexible, and that's kind of a blessing and a curse. You can work in an organization where what it does means something different to everyone. And even I think all of your members will have a different perspective on what it means to them. So what I try to do as someone who's supposed to inspire and rally people around a strategy is lead with inspiration, lead with the vision. What are those intrinsic motivators? What are those values? At the end of the day, I think businesses and individuals want to help people feel like they're part of something bigger than them, which we're all, hardwired to look for. And ideally, that is harnessed in a way that's positive for everyone involved and for the businesses that host them. So yeah, I think sometimes I get on talks like this and in conversations, and it's so quick to dive into, what are the tactics we're going to do? What Are we going to do a weekly webinar? Are we going to do a newsletter? What platform are we going to use? What bells and whistles does it need? You know, does it need to have, you know, ability to match people through a random, you know, coffee chat recommendation engine? I mean, there's so many. I feel like the software space around this, like how do people connect with one another? You know, ranging from social media tools to like online forum tools for like B2B enterprises. It's really blown up, especially during the lockdown when we were all using virtual to get in touch. But there's also a lot of software to facilitate in-person connection, and how we meet up in real life is facilitated by technology. So again, I'm getting very high level, but I think sometimes stepping away from the bells and whistles, the tactics, and then leading almost like a values storming or a conversation around, okay, if we're here, like beyond potentially getting compensated for being involved, like what are those intrinsic motivators? What are we inspired by? What gets you like up in the morning and like excited to log in and pick up your phone, and all of those ways that we interact with one another?
I love what you just said, Jeremy, because you know, you really nailed it, I think, with what the difference is with strategy and tactics, right? It's like strategy guides you, the tactics push you in a certain direction, you know, and all these tools are built for tactics, not for strategy. And so it's like, you know, you need that overarching strategy to kind of guide everything else that you do, because without it, you can go anywhere, pick any tool, do anything you want, but you're not like having this clear vision of where you're trying to get.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump back to the city planner, community manager. You know, I've seen it two other ways as well. Apartment communities sometimes have community managers instead of property managers, because I guess they're trying to spin it. And then for co-working spaces, we'll often have community managers, and that's more about managing the community inside the co-working space. And hey, we're having a coffee party at 2, you should come.
I will say that I was part of one in New York when I lived in New York, and the community manager there, I will agree, it was a lot of that. But one thing that they did that was really interesting was they tried to connect the members that belonged to the co-working space together based upon their conversations when they onboarded you. And I thought that was the closest thing I've seen to a true community manager in a co-working space.
I think that's true. I whenever I talk to somebody in the real world, as opposed to the, you know, community management world, I always preface it by saying online community manager, just to make sure it's clear. And then you know, there's the barrage of questions like, what's that? You know, so you do Twitter all day? Yeah.
No. That has been my job at one point. I was on Twitter.
Twitter all day.
I was on Twitter a lot more. Well, Twitter's doing a lot. Well, Twitter's a whole can of worms, but they had a lot around like spaces and lists, and there's a lot of features and functionality that you can use to build community and connect people and facilitate. But again, it's a tool that is constantly changing. You can stay up to date on what it does, but at the end of the day, like, what are you offering across these platforms, and what features and functionality do you plug in to deliver that vision or experience that you want people to have? Where it's, you know, if most of the people you want to engage are active on Twitter, it's probably a good idea to use Twitter to as part of your community strategy. So yeah, sometimes there's also this false, you know, community management isn't social media management, but I feel like at the end of the day, these are all just vehicles through which you have conversations and meet new people, right?
Yeah. Community management, like I said, it's a practice. It's a practice. I mean, it's something that you do. The technology stack that you do it on really doesn't matter. So I don't care if it's necessarily Twitter. I wouldn't say Twitter is great for building community on. I just would say it's not easy as compared to some other things. But if that's where your
they have communities too, David.
Yeah.
Twitter has communities too now, just like WhatsApp.
Yes, they do.
And they're bringing Vine back, so
they're wonderful, aren't they?
Well, and I would say sometimes what shifts people away from those platforms is the whole like data privacy. Like, like for a company, like what is an owned community where they, can best serve people because they're aware of what they're doing, right? And
right. I mean, you're also, if you own it, kind of. So I mean, and it's getting to the point where you don't ever actually own it anymore. Most community offerings are converting to SaaS, where it's software as a service, but you have the sense of greater control over what's happening to your stuff. Whereas if you're in a Facebook group and Facebook decides to change the way groups work, you can't opt out of that change.
Right.
You are stuck with it. So when they change their little algorithms and you're no longer getting the promotion and the depth and the spread that you used to get, you just have to deal with it. Whereas if you have something that you own, it's got, it's technically on your site, even though you're paying somebody else to host it for you. Then at least you have some control,
And that's a great point, because like, if you're not having those conversations as part of your strategy at the beginning, you could be completely screwed if you go down one of these routes where you don't have more control over it, right? And I mean, we've been working with a client and it's kind of on pause right now, but it's like, it's ultra sensitive as far as privacy and communications go. And the platforms that we're suggesting, the tech stack that we're suggesting with it, are all matching what their prime objectives are for this community, right? And so it's like, they do want to have some open spaces, but they also want to have very secure spaces. And so having those conversations early, making sure that you identify that as part of your strategy is so important, because if you're not having those deep, I mean, you need to push sometimes. You can't just rely on people to give you the information. You need to push the information. And because if you're not doing that, you're going to not be happy at the end of the day. Your client's not going to be happy, or your company, if you're working for the company. It's got to be something that you are like having those tough conversations, asking the important questions, and getting the really honest answers. Because if you're not, your strategy is not going to be well formed to help guide you in the direction that you need to go. And your conversation, David, about talking about these, social media platforms versus more controlled ones are so important, because I don't think a lot of people, they just think, oh, build it where they are, build it where the people are. And that's not a strategy, right? That's might be a component of your strategy, but there are a lot of other questions that come into play.
I totally agree. Totally. I've been in situations where there have been, it's a community, and this was in a SaaS environment where it was software as a service. And the conversations that we were having in the community, in some cases, due to the rules and regulations that the company we were working with had to follow for fiduciary and legal reasons, had to be almost as anonymized as possible. And so their accounts would have these random strings of numbers. You would not be able to tell what company they worked with, who they worked for, and there were some that the companies wouldn't even allow them to do that. And in order to participate in the community, they would send me an email that says, could you post this for me? And I would say, hey, I'm posting this on behalf of a customer. They have this question. What's your response? And then they could watch it as people responded and maybe send me stuff to help finagle it to where they were getting the answers that they wanted. But they just couldn't participate at all in the community because of, if they said just the wrong thing, it could have their company get fined millions of dollars, and nobody wants that on their plate. That's a quick road to unemployment when your boss the company has to pay out a couple of million because you said the wrong thing to the wrong person. So I think that's all good. Adapting on the fly. So you've created a strategy, you've got it going, and it's not working. You're not achieving the things that you wanted to achieve.
I've never had a strategy that didn't go the way I thought.
Really?
Saying me very sarcastically.
Yes. I think I would be more afraid if it went perfectly,
What's wrong?
No, why am I so in sync with these people that I just, can do no wrong? Yeah. So how do you adapt on the fly, right? And what if you can't tell? I mean, you set, a plan and it seems to be working, but maybe it's not working as well as you thought, but it's also not failing. That
That's
middle of the
almost
road.
worse. That's almost worse.
Yeah. So it's like, how do you handle those changing, evolving situations? Do you scrap what you have? I mean, if it's failing, you scrap what you have. That's a given, and you just say, okay, we're going to have to adapt and start over and rethink this. But those middle of the road ones where it's kind of working, it's kind of not. How do you manage that? How do you find the places where you need to
There's
do
a
it?
third
Go,
one in
Jim.
there too.
Okay, give me the third one.
The third one is when something's working well, how do you make it work better?
Oh, and
Yeah.
can you make it work better?
Right.
If you
There's
do
always
make it
that
work better, is it
threshold.
going
I've
to
always
kill?
found there's this threshold of how
Yeah.
far you can push things where it's the law of diminishing returns, right?
Right. Any thoughts? Anybody?
Yeah, I would say as much as possible, I try to, in the strategic planning phase, include contingencies and kind of like SWOT analysis type, setting expectations that, while we're still trying to figure out, one, if we're delivering value to our members, two, if there's an actual need for this, setting expectations that the whole point is to come up with some sort of like product like if the community is a product offering outside of what the company sells, whether it's a software tool or a new electric toothbrush, and as part of the electric toothbrush you get access to these cool forums about dental hygiene. I don't know, that's not a real example. Would I join that? I don't know.
Hey, early on, early in the days of the internet, if I can speak like that, Bank of America had a community for their customers. It was a legit forum.
Talk about like financial literacy and things like that.
It's craziest thing. They would talk about that. They would discuss financial planning. I mean, and obviously it was just another channel for them to promote stuff to them. But there was a legit community that was forum based for customers of Bank of America to participate. It wasn't super active, but it existed in a place where you just wouldn't think it would. So, and of course it does not exist today. So it was successful.
They weren't able to pivot the strategy. Yeah. So yeah, I think for me, trying to keep in mind those contingencies and, potential risks, even as you're going into executing the strategy that you put together with all the stakeholders, so that, trying to avoid surprises is my MO. And also auditing, like what assumptions were made here. If you decided on certain metrics with the group, auditing also like, okay, when we're tracking XYZ, this is what it means. And within that, we're making XYZ assumption. And going in with a hypothesis, like almost like using the scientific method. Like, what is your hypothesis? And running, ideally you'd have enough resource to run like real, like controlled experiments and actually run a research study and, see if impact is actually like statistically significant. But really, like when you're doing this work, a lot of times you're just making like a decision on a Tuesday on the fly.
It's always a Tuesday.
Yeah, you never want to do anything on a Friday. You always do it on Monday. They're super busy with getting started back to work. Tuesday, pretty good day. You can do that. It's a little slower. Wednesday, it's hump day. They're excited because they've only got 2 days left, so they're kind of all over the place. Yeah. Thursday, they're catching up on emails from the rest of the week that they put off, and Friday, they're just thinking about the door. So Tuesday is the perfect day.
Yeah, like let me rename this or try this out. See if this, again, like rapid prototyping. But ideally you're also like keeping it as simple as possible. I think that's what I've struggled with sometimes when I'm being that leader, right, and getting people rallied around a strategy. I go so much into the weeds and the tactics and the bells and whistles and the stuff we were talking about earlier. So yeah, auditing and like being clear and like actually documenting what potential contingencies and risks are with the strategy, trying to keep it as simple as possible, and then also auditing like what assumptions you made in developing the strategy is something that I've tried to bake in from the get-go. Just so people don't get unpleasantly surprised. It's like, we thought about this, here's the rationale. Everyone is bought in and understands like, hey, at this point in time, with the current available resources and information, we made this call for this reason, and we're aware of potential risks and opportunities with that.
Do you ever have any challenges with setting those expectations, getting everybody to agree on what those expectations should be?
Yeah, I do.
Just, yes.
I'm learning like how to be a coach and how to really, all the stuff of leadership. I mean, nobody teaches you this stuff. Oh, looks like someone
She'll be
disappeared.
back, maybe.
Yeah.
It's all right. We can handle it.
Yeah, so I would say yes, it can be really challenging.
Yeah. Yeah, expectations. Managing expectations always can be. And then, when things aren't exactly going the way you thought they would, then you got to go back and, hey, I know I expected this, but it's not working. Can we rediscuss this? Maybe change this, that kind of thing. Did you have any questions, Tim?
Well, no, I was just, when you first asked the question, I mean, I've always, not always, but in the last 10 years or so, always looked at things as like,
that X Enterprise is joined.
What was working, what was interesting, and what worked like even better, or what caught my interest kind of and I used to do this daily, right? Now I just kind of do it weekly, but I know a lot of people use like the rosebud thorn thing now, but it's, it's kind of like this where, when I look at the strategy ongoing with the client, and I think this is where community managers really shine. It's because you can see they're not colossal fails that everybody sees. They're not massive wins that everybody sees. They're the nuances that you can suggest and make tweaks on the fly and test whether it goes down or goes up, and maybe make another tweak and do that. And if you can communicate these things, if you need to work with another stakeholder within your organization, if you need to work with a partner to be able to make these things happen, if you can try and find a way to do this without affecting your budget or additional resources, you have carte blanche on playing with this area. And I think that's where our talents and our skills come in that most people don't understand. When people say, what do you do? I say, this is the essence of my job. I make these little tweaks that nobody ever notices, but they can have sometimes huge impacts on the future direction of where the strategy goes. And I think that's the beauty of a community manager. And I think, Jeremy, you mentioned this early on, and I think in your first answer, it's like, you need to be able to communicate in a language that everybody understands, right? Like, salespeople talk one language, your product team speaks a different language, your engineering team talks a different language, your members talk a different language, your executives talk a different language. And you need to be able to kind of pull all this information together and be able to communicate that in a way. It's the same thing with these little tweaks. It's like, if you know who you need to talk to and how you need to phrase it to get these things done, these are huge opportunities to unlayer some things that you didn't know existed. And one of the biggest things I know we did at HuffPost was when we were launching HuffPost Live, was getting our community members to be on-air guests. And I know I've shared this in a previous episode, but it was like, that was our strategy, right? For the community. We wanted our people that were listening, watching, commenting to get their face like we are right on air with our hosts and talk about topics. And we tried and we got one person, and it was, everybody celebrated. But then like the biggest thing after that was, okay, where's the next one? Where's the next one? And I just started asking some of the people that were really passionate about what we were creating in the community. And they were like, no, we don't want to be on air. We want to type in our comments. We want to be able to correct ourselves if we make a typo, if we say the wrong thing, we can go back and delete it. We can think about it before we say. We get on air, whatever comes out of our mouth is coming out of our mouth, and we can't hit the back button. We can't not send that. That's already out there. We do not want to be on air, but we're happy to be here. We're happy to have our comments read on air. And I'm sitting here going, okay, this is a huge miss here, right? I mean, I could have looked at it as a fail, but I didn't look at it as a fail because I saw this could be an inflection point. How can we pivot here? How can we do something a little bit differently? And that one little shift was, instead of focusing on the people that are our commenters, we had this huge blogging community of like 10,000 bloggers over here. Why didn't we reach out to the blogging community who want their faces on their bylines, who want their names out there, who want their voices heard, to be able to have another platform to be able to do that on? And as soon as we did that, it gave us a whole new influx of guests to be on-air guests for our producers to be able to put segments together. And so it was just that one little thing. And I think that's the other difference too that we can do as community builders, as community managers or community strategists, whatever we want to call it, is we see those nuances and can tell the difference, what's a fail, what's a win, and what might somebody else look at as a major fail or a major win, and you go, no, this is how we can kind of pivot here and change our strategy on how we're doing things and really see different results.
Well said. Very well said. And that's our show. No, I'm kidding.
Mic drop. Yeah, we're done. Bye.
Mic drop. That was very good too. Very good. I think that, that the whole thing points to community managers we always say that we tend to wear very many hats. And I think that it's not by choice. I think it's by necessity. And that we often carry around a lot of different skill sets with us. And each community manager has a different set of skills, right? But we all have multiple skill sets. We may not be social media managers, but we sure understand how it works. And we understand the differences between the platforms probably better than the normal typical user. We may not use it every day, but we have to kind of know how it works and how it can be used and how we can put it to work for us. We often have to be graphic design people, even if we're not the best in the world. We often have to have that skill set, because if we put something out there content wise, which means we got to be writers too, we've got to have all of these little disparate things to, jack of all trades, master of a few, as
producer, video show host.
Yeah, like this show is it's chaos behind the scenes. I'm sure, I really hope it looks smooth to you guys out there in TV land, but YouTube land. But behind the scenes, I'm flying by the seat of my pants most weeks. And sometimes, like this one is one that we kind of planned. We knew that we would have some people, but things happen and not everybody can show up when they can. And sometimes they come in at the very last minute, multiple weeks in a row.
Not saying
I'm kidding, Carolyn. I'm not naming any names, Carolyn. None at all. No. But I mean, it's just it's the nature of the beast. We all have lives and things going on. And I've had, people that have said, I can do this. And then things have gotten in the way and they couldn't. And, it's not a reflection on me. It's, I'm, standing on the shoulders of giants here is what I always say. But it's really, I rely on Carolyn, I rely on Jeremy, and I rely on Tim to help back me up to get this done. And each of these people have a different set of backgrounds. And because I'm here learning from them as well, right? I will probably never run an art community, but if I have to, I know who to bug, right? I can go to Carolyn and say, how does that work? And I've worked in SaaS before, so I can do that. And I've been all over the place community management wise, because I feel like I said, it's a skill set, it's a practice, and it can apply to anything regardless of what it is or where it is. And so, I've worked in the gaming industry, I've worked in cybersecurity, I've worked in an events planning company. I've worked for a software as a service doing targeted email stuff, audience segmenting, I guess is the best way to describe it. After that, I worked at a cybersecurity company, moved over to another security company, and then now I'm at a hardware software company. So it's adaptability, I guess, is what I'm saying. We're community managers. We can adapt to anything because
pivot pros, really.
Yeah.
What we
And
with this webcast, I appreciate the consistency, and I appreciate how like informal and conversational it is, because I feel like, to your point earlier, I feel like a lot of people get on these webinars and feels very high stakes for whatever reason. This feels more like, oh my god, I'm totally.
I want it to be a conversation. Yeah, it's a conversation because
I want to learn about building artist communities, because that is literally my passion.
Oh my god, let's talk. Yeah.
Connections are made.
I'm secretly a ballerina.
Don't let it be a secret. I design knitwear, so
I want to see Jeremy in a tutu.
You may one day at my artist debut.
I will be there.
I'll facilitate. We'll facilitate.
See, yeah. Plans are being made. Communities are being built as we speak.
Right now, yeah.
So, back to strategery and community.
Strategery.
I'm sorry. There was a one-time president who used to use that word occasionally. Yeah, it's my speech impediment. Strategy is one of those words that's hard for me to say without throwing a D in the middle of it.
You've done awesome this whole time.
I know, but I have to think about it before I say it.
You're doing great.
Yeah. So, let's see. What haven't we covered? We covered. I didn't write questions down for this one because I figured it would be easy to riff off of, and now we've talked so much I've forgotten what I asked. We've talked about success. We've talked about changing midstream. What about measuring in the end? How do you take what you've done, your successes, and we used to have Tim and I used to have a longtime friend who has gone on to do bigger and better things, I guess, who used to say, celebrate your successes. And his big thing was grab all of the little stuff and being able to present it. And, but how do you go about doing that? How do you, especially with things that are, what you've done with your strategy, and how do you ball that up and just say, hey, look, we did this and it did this. We planned for this and this happened and it was good. How do you put that all together?
Number one, and this is like social marketing hat on, absolutely burn all the vanity metrics. Like you don't care.
But we have 54 followers on YouTube.
I mean, I just hit 70 today, so I'm very proud of that number. I'm excited. Like, that's a total vanity metric, and I'm allowing myself my Friday vanity time. So,
but it's not 100. That's all I'm saying.
Way to kick me. Thank you.
Hey, I'm at 54, 55. Maybe.
Well, have you?
No, you're doing great compared to me. So,
so one of the big things for like data, like my mom, if she's watching this, she's an accountant, was an accountant my whole childhood. So the math is very important, and knowing what numbers matter is probably more important than the data points. Knowing which ones to talk to, Jeremy's point earlier, which ones matter to which stakeholders, because that's going to create custom reporting, and then just get in the habit of doing it early. So for the different communities that I manage, we're small teams. Like, the entire company for our artist community is 2 people, me and one other person. And for myself, like, I'm a 1-woman brand. And then for Communify, which is a software startup, it's a pretty small team too. So knowing internally what matters to us on all of those different teams is going to be really different down the road than what matters to, funding, potential stakeholders, things like that. With our arts community, we've already had conversations with, potential funding, other like municipal support, regional support, just general buy-in from the greater artist community in the Midwest. The numbers that we have to share are very different than what we talk about in our team meeting. In our team meeting, we're like, hey, let's look at hours read, time logged, number of people logged in, have people gone inactive, things like that. Like, an arts board or an arts guild in a city doesn't care about that. They want to know cross-discipline, like how many different disciplines are represented. They want to know regionally where people are based. Those are the things that matter to them. That's what we have to report on. So figuring out your system early on to develop those custom reports, and then just do it and keep doing it, because you don't, on the social media side, you don't want to have somebody say, how have we done over the last 6 months? And you're like, good question. Let me pull that report. Like, you want to have it. Like, I mean, I've been in that boat where I've been like, yeah, that's we've been so in content mode. Just get in the habit of reporting, do it, have it be automatic. There's great tools out there that exist and are being developed, Communify, that help with that. You can do it. You can figure it out and develop the custom reports that are going to help measure those things. And they're going to be different for every community, which is a non-answer, but.
But you, Jeremy?
Yeah, I think that captures a lot of what is important. I try to balance also the quantitative stuff with qualitative wins. Getting that screenshot of the thread where people are saying like, this is the best thing ever, and getting the internal stakeholder that chats you like, this is so helpful, you've alleviated so much pressure, the community allowed me to do XYZ. So those types of things are really helpful. I think where the aspect of celebrating success and outcomes that I sometimes struggle with is like getting a really good project management tool or framework. People use Gantt charts. There are a ton of different ways to just like track how, like, what's your roadmap and what are you achieving over time, but also like what was the target and how did you perform against those targets. And I think with the type of work that we do, sometimes the targets shift in the middle of the period, in the middle of the quarter, or in the middle of the time frame where you're supposed to be hitting that target for reasons we've discussed. Like, you realize in the middle of it that actually nobody wants this, or you realize in the middle of it that and so sometimes when you have to pivot so quickly, it makes it a little challenging to fit it in a neat little box when it does come that time to answer the question, okay, like, we did this, like, what's the result? So that's something, again, that I try to craft narratives around and figure out how to best keep everyone along with me on the journey of community.
Little
rainbow.
Yeah.
I really love that you brought up, the quantitative and the qualitative part, because I think, different stakeholders are going to see different things and be interested in different things. And I think your average typical employee, is going to want to see more the qualitative, like, oh my gosh, this is like what happened. And not only that, I think it celebrates and puts some of your fellow coworkers in the spotlight too, as far as you're celebrating their contribution to the community as well, which means that everybody plays a role in the community, not just the community manager and the community members, right? It's like your entire team does. So seeing those things, I think, really helps. The other thing, and I do think that, the way that I've always done these reports is, one, make sure that you're referencing what your strategy was to begin with, because if nobody knows that, they don't know where you've come from and where you're trying to get. So kind of give that overarching picture. I kind of view this as like the executive summary, right? Like, here's what we plan to do. Here was the important things that we were measuring this period. Here's the results. Real quick snapshot. So anybody that's looking at it could know, boom, this is what the community did for our organization, right? And then you go into more like the different, tactics that you took and breaking those down into the quantitative and qualitative things. And then you might have at the end kind of this spreadsheet for the data geeks, right? They're probably more like your executives and accountants that want to go through and look at all the numbers. And so you have that for them. But I think the other thing is, and this is another area where I think the community manager really plays a huge role, is understanding, why these things happened. Not just that they happened, but why they happened. And take out your extrapolation of, this was, and there's another area, just like quantitative and qualitative, right? Was this, causational or correlational? And you being able to identify that and say what your hypothesis on that helps guide you into what you can do the next time when you revise your strategy and go into the next quarter, the next half a year, next year, as far as what adjustments you can be making. And it might be that if it's correlated and not causational, you might be able to start working with other internal stakeholders or partners to be able to build the stack tool, to be able to start making, measuring that, to see maybe that correlational thing is caused by this, but we can't figure that out until we tie these two technologies into play. And let's see, is it worth the investment to do this next, this next period? And so those are, I think, important things as you look at, the measurement goes as far as putting this together and really helping. You can create one report that everybody can get some benefit out of if you do it, both, a quantitative and qualitative, and make sure that you're putting in the causational and correlational along with your executive summary so that everybody knows what they're looking at. But I do think that there's other things that you can do that are more specific to specific groups if you're targeting that report just to a specific, stakeholder in your organization, to a executive leadership team. You don't need to show them the whole thing. You might want to pull out as specific parts of that and then create a separate report for them. And David, after you chime in, I think we should talk about how often we do this.
I don't really have much to add. My problem is that when it comes to the strategy, sometimes I find that this is a problem with me, so it may not be everywhere, is I'll make too many changes at once, and then it's hard to pin what change made the difference. So one of the things that we've been working with lately in my community is getting people more active in the community. More engagement is what someone would say. And we've made a lot of changes to the way the site was laid out, navigational changes. We've made feature changes, and we've done lots of things to hopefully get people to come back and be back more often. But I can't point to one thing and say that was the change that made the difference, because navigationally it's improved. They can get to this stuff faster. But they're now getting email notifications of new things in the community. That's getting them back to the community more often too. So it's like, how do I make changes in a way that I haven't overwhelmed myself with so many changes that it's hard to say this one thing made the difference, or this one thing made it not work. That's where I struggle in what I do. And that's because I have many stakeholders in my community, and each one has their own goals and stuff. And so balancing all of that and then being able to encapsulate that to the greater goal is sometimes hard. So we have one team that's pushing to make sure that when they follow a topic, email notifications are going out. Great. We've got a billion topics. Let's reduce those topics down to just a few so that it's not a sprawling community, but a smaller, tight knit, more focused. We made those changes, and that's going to help, get focus on content that's being posted by users and hopefully get responses faster. So all these changes, competing, but achieving the same goal. But it's hard to now say this one change made the most difference or the least, made a difference. And that's where I struggle. So just be aware of that. When you make changes, try to not do the same kind of changes that will impact the same metric, because then it's hard to say this worked better than others. It muddles the water, it muddies it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And go ahead. As far as, I forgot what you asked me.
Oh no, I was going to say how often we should be doing it.
I do it monthly. I have monthly cadence kind of a thing that we do with some stuff. I do a quarterly one, and then I have a yearly one. And the quarterly one goes past, like it depends on the level of management. So the monthly one is with my manager, the quarterly one is with his manager and maybe his manager's manager. And then the yearly one is kind of his manager's manager for sure type thing. And that's how we kind of balance it out and say, here's the initiatives that we took, here's the successes that we had, here's where we need further improvement, here's where we failed. I'm very good about putting where we failed first. this didn't work. So here's what we're going to do to correct that, and lead into that discussion. That's the way I do it: quarterly, monthly, quarterly, yearly.
Jeremy, Carolyn, you guys have anything different as far as how you go about your timing on reporting?
For all the communities that I am currently managing, like I said, our teams are small. So I'm looking at the numbers at the very minimum weekly, right, for everybody's. And then talking with other team members, only 2 of the communities have other team members. It's usually happening for Communify, we do it weekly. And then for amidst the artist community, that's much closer to monthly. We're a little bit more sporadic, especially we check in. We have a monthly event where we have an expert speaker. We usually are looking at the numbers right before that happens and then right after to kind of see if there was a spike based on their network that they maybe brought in for the event, and look kind of like causational about that event. But that's like a little bit more specific because our content is so, I guess, programmatic for that community. So that's a little bit different of a way of reporting. And then an annual review for everybody.
Anything different for you, Jeremy?
Yeah, I'm on a cycle with a vendor where we do kind of like an EBR, but that's more of like an executive business review where they're also trying to assess potential growth opportunities, right? So that we expand with our license with them. And then because a lot of what I do in my current role, but also previously, has been kind of cobbling together data through manual exports, analyzing things in spreadsheets. It takes time. I don't have my perfect, beautiful dashboard with, color-coded automation, and I haven't gotten there quite yet, whether it's in Salesforce or in Amplitude. So I stick to a quarterly cadence just because of the work that's needs to go into actually getting all the numbers right. So that's kind of what I've been up against. So if anyone has any suggestions, I'm open to it. But I know we're at time.
We are at time. So if you would, Tim, I know has got to pop at 3. I'll let him go first. And if you need to jump, you can jump. We'll just go Tim, Jeremy, Carolyn, and then I'll wrap it up. How about that? Who you are,
good.
what you do, where you do it, that kind of thing.
You got it. And thank you, Jeremy and Carolyn and David. I really enjoyed the conversation, and Jeremy, you nailed it. It's like this format is great. I just love the casual going back and forth because I think this is how we learn more than having something pre-planned in our heads. So, but I am Tim McDonald. I am the head of community at homeroom.club, and we are a software as a service company, platform agnostic. So we just help clients develop their community platforms and strategies and get them implemented and running. And that's a little bit about me.
Jeremy.
My name is Jeremy, and I'm a dancer extraordinaire / B2B community manager. I can be reached on Twitter at JeremyG21, and I'm available on LinkedIn as well. So always happy to make connections. And I use LinkedIn a lot more than I would like because it's I'm like on LinkedIn all the time. I don't know when this happened to me.
That's it. I'm gonna message
but I'm
you on LinkedIn real quick.
I'm definitely excited to just connect with other folks in this in doing this type of work, and happy to be here.
Carolyn.
Well, I sent you a LinkedIn request. I like that you feel like the confession of the spending way more time on LinkedIn than you'd like. That is, since last December, I'm like, why am I always on this site? But it's been really beneficial. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Carolyn Zick, Z-I-C-K, spelling down there. It's apparently hard to spell. My company is Bad Axe Enterprises. You can find that also on LinkedIn, as well as badaxeenterprises.com. I am also director of marketing at Communify. We're on LinkedIn, surprise, and also Twitter, Instagram, all of those places. But easiest way to connect with me is either by email, carolyn@badaxeenterprises.com, or on LinkedIn.
Thank you very much. I want to thank our guests and our co-host, Tim McDonald, for joining us today. And thank you to our audience, who would be names that I have now forgotten, Teresa and Jeffrey. If you would like to be a guest on an upcoming episode or have a topic that you would like us to cover, you can go to cmgrlive.com, scroll down the page a little bit. There's a form that you can fill out. If you prefer an audio version of it, you can get it on Apple, and I have Amanda Nazan Music here, and that's how it's spelled, Amanda Nazan. And thank you to our guests. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week. Next week, we're talking community management tips. We should have a full cast. I think we might have 15 million people on, just because everybody's going to have a tip that they want to talk about. And I think I said I was going to have 4 or 5, but I'll take 15 or 16. I think I can only have 12 though. But thank you everybody for joining us. I think, and then a week after that, we've got something special planned, but I'm not going to talk about it yet. So thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.